Hello and welcome back. I hope you found the demo playthrough of Pacific Typhoon useful. What I'm going to do now is just give you my final thoughts and a wrap up on this marvellous series. Overall, I see much to like in this game. The Atlantic Storm, Pacific Typhoon, Sirocco series offers wonderful social gameplay. It really isn't a war game. Proper grognards and historical fanatics will wonder how ships, planes, and other units can turn up in completely unlikely scenarios. But for me, that's part of the fun. You have to fight a battle. You turn up with a selection of the forces you have available, and you never quite know what's going to happen. I think what does it for me is not only is the uncertainty, the really gripping tension, a great source of entertainment, but with some exceptions, a lot of it's actually quite plausible. And at the end of the day, if you restrict things a bit too historically rigidly, then you don't have much of an enjoyable game because all you're doing is replaying scripted history. Now, there is a place for scenarios in heavy historical war games where you have to have restrictions on wiggle room, but a simple beer and pretzels game like this is simply not it. It's fun. For those who want to try the alternatives, the optional rules include the ability to reorganize the cards so you can fight the battles in chronological order, and you arrange the units that way too, and you simply add the next year to the card decks as you deplete the previous year. You can play team games for those who really struggle with being both Axis and Allied at the same time. You can split the decks into Axis and Allied decks and play that way. You can also play team games both with the standard rules or with the separated combatants, the Axis and the Allies put apart. So there's a lot of flexibility in the game system, and the rules, particularly the optional rules in Pacific Typhoon, encourage players to try doing that, see what works for them. For those who are pressed for time, and I think I mentioned this in the first video, there is also an accelerated gameplay option where each round the round leader will draw 4 battle cards instead of 2 and just chooses one. So that ends games very rapidly. And also, you know that you're very unlikely to use more than a third to half of the deck. So that heightens the uncertainty because you have some idea of what you've not seen yet, but you don't know whether it's going to pop up in the context of the game. And that affects your thinking and your risk management in a way that I find really quite enjoyable. So a fringe benefit is that you suddenly find yourself being rather good at trivia. It's weird, but trust me on this one. If you play this game often enough, you will suddenly find yourself remembering how big convoy PQ-13 was and how significant it was and how many ships were lost. These things will just stick in your head because it's part of the way the game trains you. You'll learn that the German Matox radar detection system was trumped by the Allies developing centimetric radar, which was better than metric wavelength. And silly stuff like that will start to stick in your head. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And it's just very handy. It helps my recall, especially when, as I'm prone to do, you want to keep an eye out on historical events and you want to mark particular battles in your calendar for commemoration. So just take a bit of a look at those, and the dates and a summary of what happened are all on the cards. So before I end off, I suppose the final question to consider with these games is, do I have a favourite? Because the rules are very slightly tweaked differently in all of them. I did mention in the first video you do feel like you're playing in a different theatre every time. Difficult question to answer. Atlantic Storm presents a slightly asymmetrical feeling where for the early war period German subs will reign supreme and have their wicked way. Elsewhere, The Royal Navy is very dominant. Bismarck and Tirpitz are both in that game. They're powerful units, but the Royal Navy has powerful units too. And playing one of the big German battleships carries great risks. You really feel whichever side you're playing in a given round. You really get the sense of who you're playing and how it stacks up. And the same feeling is imparted by Pacific Typhoon. Now this game is at least as bloody as Atlantic Storm, but it's bloody in a different way because there's a similarity in the units on the two sides. It's not asymmetric in the way that the Royal Navy's fight with the Kriegsmarine was. Both in the Pacific, of course, both sides have carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and so there's very much more this sense of two, at least initially, for the 1942 scenarios, or battle cards, I should say, evenly matched combatants having a go at each other. Of course, for the handful of 1941 cards, the Japanese are ascendant. Anything after 1943, US units tend to dominate. But the Japanese do still have some surprises up their sleeves. They have the Oka suicide rocket. They have Yamato herself, who, if she still exists late in the game, can be committed to a desperate final sortie. You can do things like husband the carrier Taiho right to the end, make some use of her. But of course, the Americans have their wonderful Essexes hiding in there, waiting to come and cause chaos. So all of that. Med Sirocco. Med Sirocco is an interesting one. It does a rather good job of balancing the situation in the Mediterranean by giving the Italians, I think rightly, a pretty prominent role. To some degree, it's a bit ahistorical. Of course, the Italians were hugely restricted by both their own strategic worries and, more crucially, by their lack of fuel. Fuel is present in Med Sirocco. In fact, there's both Axis and Allied cards that either boost or reduce the Axis ability to commit to sorties. But the Italians have a decent role, as is right, because on the Axis side, aside from the German submarines and air units, much was expected of the Italian fleet. And the game reflects British concerns about what the Italian fleet might have been capable of. Now, the British are no slouches either. They have all their older battleships that were present in the Mediterranean. The US carrier Wasp joins in. There's a number of British carriers present. In fact, come to think of it, that's just made me remember errors and artistic execution. All three games look pretty in their own very different way. You can see they're very much reflections of their time and their company's graphical style. So, of course, Atlantic Storm, Pacific Typhoon, Med Sirocco. They have that very unique feel, and it's underlined by the artwork. If I have one criticism, it's that Med Sirocco fluffs up rather badly in terms of their picture research. Atlantic Storm had a couple of gaffes. You get the anti-aircraft merchant ship, converted merchant cruiser Allenbank, but the ship in the picture is the landing ship Glenroy. Now, only someone with, a bit of a problem like me would notice something like that. It's not a problem. But Med Sirocco gets a couple of things really quite badly wrong. And one example, I think the most outstanding one, is the British fleet carrier Illustrious is described in the game as an escort carrier, and she's also rated very low in victory points. And what that does is this powerful unit, you feel you can use her with impunity, because if you lose her, she's only worth a couple of victory points. And yet she brings so much combat power to the table. And also, the title, describing Illustrious as an escort carrier, come on, bet you the Axis would have hated to have met what we called a fleet carrier in a dark alley if that was the case. But that is a minor niggle. That's a minor niggle. I do also think that the Vittorio Veneto class battleships are slightly overpowered, but I understand why they've done that. It is in the interest of play balance. Other companies do worse by letting the Italians use the carrier Aquila. They don't do that in this game. I think if I'm pressed for a favourite, I would say it's Pacific Typhoon, but more because I have a theatre bias than because I think it's necessarily a superior game. As I say, if you can get your hands on this one, which is the easiest to lay your hands on at the moment, go for it. If you can find this one, it's awesome. Hard to find, awesome. This one is in the throes of being reproduced. So good luck finding this version, but you may find Atlantic Storm Admiral's Edition hitting the shelves soon, which by all accounts is an improved version of this. And if they're right about it being an improvement, then it is well worth playing. Well, thank you all very much for listening. Happy gaming. I hope to come back to you with another item that I'd like to show off, talk to you about. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.